We reached the second month of Adar.
Second month of Adar, yes. Another month have passed.
So it does feel strange having 2 months of the same name. But you explained all about that last time, so we won't go there. But what happens in the second month of Adar is we have a very special feast, really.
Mm-hmm.
Purim. Yeah, Purim. It's a very happy time in Israel. I love it. I love it that all the children are so excited and they get to dress up, and it's a nice feeling. It's a nice family feeling. So, but I thought we could maybe experiment a little bit this month. And instead of doing one big long webcast, we'll do it in little chunks, so in bite-sized pieces. So we're going to start with just trying to set the scene for the whole story of Esther.
Setting the scene about Purim.
About Purim, yeah. So if you can you take us back as far as you think you need to really put it in its context and.
Okay, so the story basically, we can say that the story goes all the way back to King Saul even, but let us just maybe begin with something like with the scene of the scroll, the scroll of Esther. And the Book of Esther. Do you call it the Book of Esther? Or
we call it the Book of Esther. Well, we don't have the idea of scrolls, but I like scroll.
Yeah, we really call it a scroll. I mean, we call it a scroll for a reason, but we can talk about that on the next webcast.
Okay, all right.
Because the word for scroll in Hebrew, it's Megillah, but Megillah has another meaning, so we necessarily call it a scroll. Right. That's why I keep saying the scroll of Esther.
Yeah, no, keep saying it because this is just another one of those instances of how we've lost so much. We've got everything clearly defined, books and you know.
I mean, all those. Esther and also never remember the name in English.
What is it in Hebrew?
How do you call that?
Ecclesiastes.
And Lamentation. These are all scrolls for us.
Scrolls.
We have 5 scrolls in the Bible. So these are 3 out of the 5. But in any case, Song of Songs as well. But in any case, so we're talking about the time in which, basically after First Temple has destroyed. Okay, has been destroyed. Okay, it's been destroyed by the Babylonians, and the Jews are sent into exile. Not too long after that. The Persians led by Darius, right, Dariavesh, they basically defeated the Babylonians, and they conquered the whole of Babylonian empire. We're talking about that time of 127 states, okay, from India to Kush, as it says in the Book of Esther. And
that's
the Jews,
a big area.
It's a very big area, and there were 127 states, and the Jews were basically spread all over those, all over the kingdom. Right. All over the kingdom. Where this is basically the time where we actually get the beginning of the Jewish community in Ethiopia, because that's when they first got there. Okay, and then we basically lost connection with them. So that's another fascinating story in our history, which starts that time as well. But that's maybe on a different webcast. Yeah. So in any case, we had all the Jews basically spread in that kingdom, and the kingdom of Persia, right, Paras, and. But so that was basically the scene. Okay, that was the scene. The governor, the king was Achashverosh, or how do you?
Well, no, we have trouble saying it even in the way that we've got it. So let's keep it the way. Let's keep it
Achashverosh. Okay, so Achashverosh was the king. Achashverosh, and we can clearly see that all throughout the scroll, we see that there is a clear distinction between 2 types of Shushan. Shushan was basically the city, right, the capital city in which the whole story happened. Achashverosh's palace was in Shushan, and we clearly see all throughout the scroll that there is, once they talk about Shushan, regular Shushan, the city of Shushan, and in other places it is mentioned as the capital of Shushan. Okay, so we understand that there was a difference between the capital, Shushan the capital, and Shushan the city. Okay, which was probably Shushan the capital was where the government sat. People didn't live there. It was where the palace was, where the parliament when they congregated, where like decisions were made, and this is where Achashverosh where he lived, and this is also where Haman is walking around. This is where everything happens.
Right.
And then there is the city of Shushan, and we can see that there was only one man. Which out of the characters, of course, which are important for us in the scroll, that could go in and out, from the capital. So he could be in the city of Shushan and also in the capital, and that's Mordechai. So just by looking at that fact, we understand that Mordechai was a minister in Achashverosh's government. Okay, he was a minister, probably the minister for all Jewish matters. There was another nation basically inside of the kingdom, and they just came from exile. They had a different language, right? They had different customs and traditions, like we know from Second Temple exile. And they needed someone to be a minister for all those matters. That he could basically negotiate with the government for those people. The government could basically pass on things to that community through him. So he was basically that one. And our tradition is that Mordechai was the one who wrote the book of Esther. He was the only one who could write the book of Esther. Right. No one else could have written it. How, just thinking of the situation that Mordechai was sitting outside of the palace. Right, it says many times that Mordechai was sitting outside of the palace. Who could have written that? And if it weren't for Mordechai. So Mordechai was the one writing it, or at least he was the one telling the whole story. It all came from him. Right, it said that Mordechai, he sent Esther to the palace. Right, only Mordechai could tell that. Right, only he was the one who could tell that. So Mordechai was basically the one writing the book, but he didn't write the book for as a biblical book. Right, it wasn't written as the book of Esther is very different than the other books in the Bible for a very obvious reason. There is one character, there is one name which is not mentioned in the book, and that is the name of God.
Yes,
right,
completely missing.
God's name is not there. Okay, it's completely not there, and this is maybe something we would linger on a bit more in the next session. We're just setting the scene, as we said. So Mordechai basically did that. So he basically wrote the book, and he wrote it as a history book for Achashverosh, for the king, right? Back then, everything that happened, they had to write it, and they had these archives and all that. So he wrote it as that. And then the Jews basically took that book and included it in the Bible because it was a very important piece in our history. So that's another thing about the scene. And just one more thing that I would like us to touch is the fact that that Haman, right? He's a very important figure in the book, right? He basically triggered the whole thing. Haman, it says so in the book that Haman was a descendant of Agag. Agag is
Agag, I think we use it.
So Agag was the king of the Amalekites, right? Years before. Okay, we're talking about the time of Samuel the prophet, right? Early biblical time, right? That we had Joshua, we had the judges, and then came Samuel. Okay, so we're talking about, quite time, right? After Samuel came King David and all the other kings, and only then. So we're talking about hundreds of years.
Right.
Okay, hundreds of years that. But it says that he was a descendant of Agag, right? At the beginning, but we know in the book of Samuel, right? We can clearly read that King Saul, King Saul had a war against the Amalekites, a war that he was sent to do by Samuel. And Samuel told him, "Listen, you have to kill them all." Okay, it says so in the book of Deuteronomy. You have to remember. You shall never forget what they did to you when you came out of Egypt, and we can talk about that a lot about just these 5-6 verses because they are so central in our covenant with God as well. But in any case, King Saul sent him to the war, and he said, listen, in the book of Deuteronomy it says that, we have to, when the time comes, then we have to finish the deal with them. Okay, we have to have a closure with them. Okay, and that closure should be with a very, very predictable end. Okay, they all must be extinct. That's the book of Deuteronomy. Women, children, men. And there's also an obligation not to touch their property. Okay, you can't take their property, their animals, their jewels, nothing. Everything has to be ruined, destroyed completely. We can talk about the reasons for that, but basically that's the command. Now, King Saul, hundreds of years before the book of Esther basically happened, the whole story there, King Saul went to the war. And in the end, he basically killed everyone except for the king. Okay, so he kept the king alive, Agag, right? And he also kept the property. And then, so that was when the war ended. And then a day later, Samuel came, right, to meet them, where the war happened, and to see basically the results. He knew already because we know that Samuel had a prophecy from God about what King Saul did. He knew that he kept the king alive. He knew that he basically kept all the animals alive. He wanted to enjoy the property. And then during that night, before Samuel went to meet King Saul, he told him, you shall tell him that I'm taking the kingdom from him. He's not going to be the king anymore. Okay, and then I'm going to give it to someone better. So Samuel went to meet King Saul, and to give him that news, and basically to see what happened. Now, if the Bible is telling us that King Saul killed them all, but he kept only Agag, then how can it be that Haman was a descendant of Agag? So we have to conclude that during that night in which Agag was still alive and he was the only one, he probably had the opportunity to be with one of the slaves, someone, and in the end we had Agag. I mean, hundreds of years later came Haman. Yes. Okay, as a result from that night.
Wow.
I mean, otherwise there is no other explanation. Then how could Haman still be? How could he live? So I mean, we can actually say that if King Saul did what he was supposed to do, then we wouldn't then we wouldn't have Haman later on and the danger to be extinct. Exactly. We wouldn't celebrate Purim, today. I mean, in the end, Purim is a very sad story.
Right.
I mean, if we read the scroll, then of course we have a happy ending, but the story was very, very sad. I mean, Haman talked about, he didn't talk about killing them in stages. He wanted to kill the entire, all the Jews in the kingdom, which were basically all the Jews in the world almost. There were a few in Jerusalem, but he wanted to kill everyone in one day. He didn't want to do it in stages. He wanted one day. It says so. Beyom echad, in one day. One day. Not even a night. Okay? So no concentration camps, no gas chambers, no actions, nothing. One day, boom, they're gone.
Wow.
That was his heart wish. And it all goes back hundreds of years earlier on to that night when King Saul kept Agag alive.
Wow.
So that's basically the scene.
So to be continued, right?
Yes, to be.
We're going to sign off here, and we're going to continue on our next webcast with the story of what happened, and then to continue to just look at who in the story do we relate to. I'm really interested to discuss that a little bit. I know for myself, the whole that expression, for such a time as this, when I first started writing oratory of Terezin, when I first started doing things that were connected with Israel, and people would come up with this phrase, they'd be praying for me, and they'd say this phrase to me, and I didn't even know where it came from. I mean, I wasn't aware of it, and but then it started to become something that I very much relate to. So
we can say something about the context in which it was said. It was said by Mordechai, but we can talk about that next time.
Beautiful. Okay, so we'll see you again in a little bit.